Hey everybody, Matt Vogel from YadaCoin. Let's talk about how we prevent your wallet from being compromised in many different scenarios. So we do so using Yada event logs. Okay, so your seed phrase are those words that you see often whenever you're initializing a wallet. They give you this recovery phrase, and these words you can use to get your entire wallet back. The problem is that if anybody gets these words, gets your recovery phrase, then they also have your wallet. So how do they do that? Well, you have to understand how the wallet is structured, right? And there's a few different standards that are involved in structuring your wallet. And those standards are BIP 32, and that's the HD wallet Bitcoin Improvement Proposal 32, and that's a hierarchical deterministic wallet. So it's a hierarchy and it's deterministic. So based on this seed phrase and a derivation path, which is outlined in BIP 44, the derivation path looks something like this. So you have the master wallet, then you have the purpose, which is 44 for BIP 44, and then you have the crypto code. So this would be Bitcoin. YadaCoin would be 657, and then these would be these apostrophes mean it's a hardened key. So don't worry about that though. That's not important. They're always hardened at this level. And then you have the account and, or sorry, this is the account. And then you have the change key, and then you have the key index. Okay, so this is like a file structure. So this is, just like your C drive or whatever, and then the subfolder, 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 and so on. So these are essentially child keys of one another. So this is the parent, there's a child, here's another child, 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 child. Okay, and I guess I should also say that this up here, this mnemonic seed phrase, is outlined in BIP 39, in case you're wondering. Okay, so this is what the attacker will have to do with this mnemonic seed phrase. Okay, so this mnemonic seed phrase is 2000. There are 2048 possible words for each of these 12 words or 24 words, however long your seed phrase is. Each one of those could be one of these 2048 predefined words in this standard. Moving on from that, so you have this path, or this derivation path here, and the attacker will just simply increment these values until they get a key that produces an address that they can then look up and get some, Bitcoin or YadaCoin, whatever. They're just looking for a balance on the address that's derived from any of these paths. So they're just going to go through all the paths and see if any keys have been used in those paths. So they're looking for addresses with a balance, right? And then once they have those keys, so they'll have the private key, not just the address, and they'll be able to spend that, right? So anything they find at that address, they'll be able to spend it as well. So how do we protect you from that? Well, we have a derivation algorithm that makes this process much more complicated to predict and, I guess, reproduce, right? So what we do is we integrate a password, or I guess it could be like a PIN or something like that. But basically, you're taking this password, you're hashing it, You're taking that hash hex value, turning it into a number, and then the number has a mod applied to it. And so the max value of each of these slots is about 2.1 billion. So the mod is 2.1 billion about, and then we just get the remainder. And so the remainder ends up being one of these. Now we do this times 4. Okay, so we actually get 4 additional spots. Okay, and we do that. We loop around 4 times to get these 4 sub-wall, or these 4 children, and they're all children of each other. So what that does is it makes it so that an attacker who gets your seed phrase has to search through 2.1 billion, 2.1 billion, 2.1 billion, and then 2.1 billion again. So that's how we protect in the case where you get your mnemonic seed phrase stolen. But there's also cases where the key that's on your device is compromised. Okay, so let's say that somebody picks up your device and you don't have a pin, or it's just like the device is actually active. You didn't lock the screen or something like that. They pick up the device and the actual key is compromised. So they've bypassed all of the derivation protection here. Okay, so now this is where the Yada event logs will come in handy. Because even if they sign a transaction and it has a valid signature where every single other blockchain in the world would accept that transaction because that has a valid signature, Yada blockchain will not. So the typical structure here is the attacker, they get your private key, they produce a valid signature, they broadcast it to the blockchain, and they're home free. And that's how all blockchains work right now. All of them. And that's even the Bybit hack had that. And so with Yada's architecture, you have the attacker, you have the private key, and then you have a valid signature, and then you have blockchain validation ahead of it. And then you have the blockchain. And so attacker must get your private key. Oh, actually, there's one more layer there. There's the password layer. Right. So the attacker must get through these layers. They must get your password, they must get your private key, they must produce a valid signature, they must pass blockchain validation, right? So let's see how that actually plays out and why they will not get past blockchain validation. So the Yada event log is a series of transactions that communicate key state. And so you have the inception event here, which is the very first event in the key event log. And this is just a transaction. And the special Yada event log properties of any event entry is the twice pre-rotated key hash, the pre-rotated key hash, the key hash, the previous key hash. And in this case, this would be blank because there's no previous key hash. And then every transaction has a public key. Okay, so the public key, when you hash it, becomes the key hash. So a hashed public key is an address. That's what addresses are. They're hashed public keys. So you have this key hash here that corresponds to the public key of this transaction. And again, this is just a normal transaction, but this also represents a key rotation. That's what this represents. And one key hash is one key rotation, and then the pre-rotated key hash is a child of this key rotation here. And then this is another child 2 steps ahead. So this is 1 step ahead. So this is, okay, so this is 1 rotation, this is 2 rotations, this is 3 rotations. Okay, so these will reference the future keys on the blockchain. Okay, so twice pre-rotated key hash references a key that should happen 2 rotations or key event logs ahead. So this Yada event log, if you have 3 events and so if you have 3 events, then this twice pre-rotated key hash on this event should equal the key hash of this event because it's 2 ahead. Okay, and again, well, I should clarify that each of these events is a signing event. Okay, so every time a key is used to sign a transaction, then a key event log is produced. A key can only be used to sign a transaction once. And then it is put on the key event log and it cannot be used after that. One of the blockchain validations is to check if a transaction's public key exists on the blockchain already. And if it does, then the transaction is rejected. Okay? So this key event references 2 ahead with the twice pre-rotated key hash. The pre-rotated key hash will reference the key that is currently on the device. So at this point, only this is on the blockchain. Only this one. And then this is the active key that's already on the device. Okay? So we were talking about the mnemonic seed phrase being compromised, right? And then now we're talking about the private key being compromised. Okay? So we're saying, what if this private key here is compromised? What if this is compromised? So again, we go back to the derivation algorithm that we had previously. Okay, so if somebody wants to compromise this key and they produce a transaction, they're going to have to prove that they know what the next key is. Okay, so they're going to have to generate a confirming transaction. So this is a unconfirmed transaction and this is a confirming transaction. An unconfirmed transaction is a transaction that requires a confirming transaction. And so an unconfirmed transaction is labeled as such when the outputs of that transaction send outside of this key event log. So if this transaction sends to somewhere outside of this key event log, it references a key hash that's not in the list here, then it is considered to be sending outside of the key event log. Now, that is the marker of an attack. It may not always be an attack, but we need to make sure. So we ask for the next rotation. So we ask for a confirming event log, or a confirming event. And so what they must do is use this key that's on the device and the password along with the chain code to produce this key. So this key event key hash will correspond to this twice pre-rotated key hash in this inception event. Okay, so the twice pre-rotated key hash will reference this key hash, and then the pre-rotated key hash will reference that key hash, and so on. Just like for further events, it would carry the same pattern. The twice pre-rotated key hash up here will then reference 2 rotations ahead here. And that's how we get this sequence of events where the transactions must follow this sequence of key hashes in order to be valid. And that's what the blockchain validation will be checking to make sure that this key hash sequence is followed. And especially if there's an unconfirmed transaction that requires a confirming key event, then it checks to see if that exists. If it doesn't, then this is denied and it's rejected. So imagine that your private key was stolen and somebody didn't know your password, they wouldn't be able to generate this key. And so they wouldn't be able to generate a valid transaction. So if this transaction is either invalid or missing, then this is rejected. And if this is, again, this is invalid, then both of them are rejected. Okay. Now we get into this next stage where what if your password is phished or it's compromised, right? So you get an email and you provide your password because you were just using one password for all of your key derivations. So now to just prevent that problem from happening, you just use a password manager. Okay, so you can introduce a password manager into this process. So the password manager will reference each of these points in the key event log, and it'll have a password at each stage. Okay, so you won't know a password to produce for a phishing attack. It won't be a password you know. This will be just random passwords generated at each step. So that's how you protect your password for your derivations. Okay, so that they can't derive that next key um, just by simply getting your password through a phishing attack. All right, so if you want to learn more about how to implement this in your wallet or implement this in your organization, we'd love to hear from you. My email is info@YadaCoin.io, or you can join our Discord or contact me on X. But yeah, so if you want to learn how to implement this yourself, we're happy to talk to you. Thanks for watching.